Hello. Hello friends, I'm Venki Venkatesh. I've been the session organizer. The session itself is transforming the energy world with IoT and data science. You all know that solving problems with physical science is very interesting. Solving problems with data science is also very interesting. But marrying physical science and data science and solving problems is a marriage made in heaven. And I see all these trees, these are the trees making the marriage happen, so to speak. Our session moderator is Abhay Gupta. He's a founder and CEO of Bijli. He's been invested in transforming the utility world using data. Since Bijli also means lightning, I assume you'll be giving a lightning talk. Sure. So at this point, I'll turn this over to our moderator, Abhay. Abhay, take it away.
Thank you, Venki. My name is Abhay Gupta. I am founder and CEO of Bijli. I have the pleasure of moderating the panel today. We have a great panel. We have a representation from startups like from myself. We have a large company representation from Madras. We have academic representation from Dr. Shankar, Dr. Raghu, and then we have Lawrence Berkeley National Lab representation from Dr. Hong. So we'll hear a lot about how data is being used in different aspects of energy transformation. Some of the format we'll follow is we'll do a 5-minute presentation by each of the panelists here, and we'll just give one question to be asked from the audience at the end of each presentation. So we'll take about half the time for this panel to be talking through presentations, and all the questions will take after that in the other 30 minutes. So have your good luck charms on the best when I'm picking which question to take after each presentation. Just joking. So I'll start and then we'll go to each of the presentation. Some of the requests from our panelists, for our panelists, keep your mic closer. I have made the mistake of talking like this. It's very hard. It's embarrassing to tell someone in the middle of the presentation. Keep your talk to about 5 minutes, 5 or 6 minutes. I'll do a quick prompt in case we are going too long. Keep your answers short and crisp so we can answer a lot more questions and not just a few questions. Good? You good? Everybody had their tea and coffee in case we are too boring and start putting it to sleep. Fantastic.
All the energy is here.
Oh, that's right. That's right. Okay. So I'm going to take a. I think we have to stay here to keep the slides going. What Bijli is doing is we are developing and monetizing the world's most accurate and actionable consumer energy profile. So we are in the residential space, home space, and consumer space, and learning about consumers. And we'll talk about what we do from the data that we get in the energy space to learn the consumer profile. If you look at smart meters, there are about, I would say 400 million smart meters around the world right now. There are about a little over 1 billion homes around the world. Most of the Western countries, North America has about 70% smart meters deployed. A lot of them in Western Europe. And then Australia, New Zealand, Japan, almost done, picking very fast. And then now we're seeing the next wave of smart meters, true smart meters coming up in India. So these smart meters, we treat them. How many guys are familiar with Fitbit? Raise your hands. Okay, great. So Fitbit is something like a sensor which gathers your information about your movements, and the data is then decrypted to identify things about your health. Similarly, smart meter, you can see this as a Fitbit for the home. And when you get the data from smart meter, what we do at Bijli is we analyze that data to extract information about appliances. So by looking at the patterns in the data coming out of smart meters, we can tell what's happening in the house. When are you using your air conditioner or heater or dryer or refrigerator? And the beauty of this is done without any other sensors. Since meters are deployed by the utilities anyways to measure the amount of energy being used by you, and since these meters have become smarter, they're capturing data at about every 15 or 30 or 60 minute intervals. That is the granularity we have taken and developed this technology. So what happens with this technology at a very large scale is we get to see our energy bills as itemized. Just like your credit card bill, your phone bill, your bank statements are itemized. Now we are able to see energy bill itemized. We are serving about 15 million homes in North America right now with these kind of itemized energy bills. And it allows people to see what's happening in the home, where am I spending more, where can I be more efficient, and so on and so forth. Now, so that's the beginning. What we are doing with that data is we are extracting down to not only when you're using your air conditioner and how much energy it's using, we're going down to things like what hours are you using? Are those peak hours? When you start marrying that with the generation capacity restrictions on the peak hours, and you combine that with, if I'm generating energy, I should be using now. If I'm not generating energy, should I be using my energy in peak hours or off-peak hours? And marrying that at a large scale with the grid load shaping, then it starts becoming much more powerful. We also can identify in the home what's approximate temperature set point, what is the insulation of your home looking like. Actually, we can also start figuring out what kind of lifestyle pattern you have. Are you a stay-at-home person? Are you a retired person? Are you a weekend warrior? Is this a vacation home? By looking at interaction of people with the front-end apps, you can start figuring out whether they're a green, cost-conscious person or a green person, or what kind of shopping personality that they have. So put those things together, you know so much about the person, and all of that is coming from the smart meter data. So I'll skip this slide in the interest of time, keeping my own 5 minutes here. So what we're doing is we have taken the model of working with utilities around the world because they possess this data at very large scale. Going to each consumer, it's very hard to get the access. Also, most of the time consumers don't care about energy as much in their everyday life. So when we work with utilities around the world, they have data from smart meters. So working with each utility, you get data in bulk, let's say billions of homes of data in one shot when you get to work with a utility. And these are the different value props that we're creating for utilities. We are helping them with their new revenue streams, in their home energy management, in their customer engagement, in their smart home controls, and the grid level stability. So with that, I'm going to invite one question for this talk. Okay, that was the first time, please.
What happens to privacy?
Great question.
Yeah, sounds
Great question. What
sounds like
happens to privacy?
I know exactly when you're going to be away from home.
Yes.
Good time to visit your home.
So question back for a question. Do you use Gmail?
Yes.
What happens to privacy? They know everything about your most private conversations with anybody they want. Because, what happens is it's a machine. It's a machine that is analyzing the data. So there are very strict security protocols. When we would work with a utility, they would give you data after they've done the SOC audits and security audits of your stuff. And then the restrictions on who owns the data, what you can do with the data. And most of the time your data is only accessed and seen by a machine and interacted with you in your application, but no human generally has the access to your data. So that is exactly how an example of Gmail works.
The number of times these companies that claim that they have your data secure and data's leaked out, I mean,
Absolutely.
For you to continue to say that.
No, absolutely. I think that's a massive responsibility. It's second question, yes. But it's a big responsibility. I think with power comes responsibility, right? With power, energy, you know. So thank you for that question. We'll continue the questions at the end after all the talks. So I'm going to introduce Dr. Shankar now. He's from Chemical Engineering Department at IIT Madras, and he graduated in '82 from IIT Madras.
Right, finish. Second response.
That's true. Okay, sorry. I thought it would give me a long introduction. Sorry about that.
We're more than welcome to talk a little bit more about this.
Give me a long introduction.
Ganesh will give you a long introduction.
I can give you a long introduction. Since he didn't introduce me, I'm from Chemical Engineering Department of IIT Madras. I've been faculty for the last 30 years. First in IIT Kanpur, followed by Madras. And I'm the Systems and Control Group. And the work that I primarily deal with is in the management and control of large-scale distributed networks, which includes predominantly water distribution networks, when we have done a lot of work. But it has also some kind of ripple effect to managing power distribution networks. My friends from electrical engineering borrowed these ideas also. So my talk is going to center on 2 or 3 problems that we have actually solved. Some of them are pure mathematical problems that are of puzzle types, but they have implications. The other ones are real field implementations that I will be talking about in the water distribution area, specifically for the in the Indian context. So one of the problems where analytics, that we have used analytics effectively, is to what we call reconstruct the configuration of the network purely from data. One may ask, why is this problem important? Even if you try to look at the records of a water network, typically in most cities even, the drawings are not available, in India at least. I am told that it takes anywhere between 3 months just to actually assemble the network by discussing with various people who operated these networks and so on. The problem that I actually looked at is constructing it from the metering data. So if we have metering data about, in this case for water distribution, we are talking about flows in the pipes, and in the case of power, we are talking about energy consumed data available from transformers, meters that are placed in all the various transformer substations and so on. So is it possible to construct a connectivity? And it turns out that this is a problem that can be solved with a combination of analytics. What we have used is what called the principal component analysis. The reason you can construct it is because these data are not independent of each other. There is a conservation relationship that holds. Water basically has to be conserved when it divides into branches, and similarly energy. When it actually comes to the substation and is distributed, they actually have to be related. So can you extract these relationships purely from data? From the relationship, can you convert it into a network connectivity? And that turns out to be a graph theory problem. But combining these two, we were able to solve this problem. We are able to actually give guarantees and say that radial networks can be constructed uniquely, but if there are loop networks, it cannot be constructed uniquely, and therefore you need additional information in order to resolve this ambiguity. So to that extent, we have solved this, which actually turns out is a very interesting offshoot of this problem that I talked about in terms of what we call the audit of a network. So that's the second problem that we are concerned with. In the management of whether water distribution or power distribution, in at least in India, the amount of water losses through these distribution networks are estimated to be anywhere between 30 to 50%. Most reports show you that that's the amount of water lost. Some of this are unauthorized withdrawals from people who are not being given connections. Others are because these systems not well maintained. So there are 2 types of losses, and you need to actually estimate both. So the problem that we try to actually see is can you do a systematic audit of these networks and figure out what is the loss, where is it, and then try to actually fix it in some way, right? And it turns out the network connectivity problem is very useful. So suppose you are given a network already, you know it, and you also have data, then you see from the data whatever network you have reconstructed, is it actually matching with the network? If there are extra links that are unexplained, they actually turn out to be the losses. So essentially the network reconstruction problem has a very important role to play in identifying exactly what are the missing links in your existing network. And they can be actually quantified, and you can actually say what is the amount of losses, unauthorized withdrawals and so on. For water distribution, there are different techniques that have been suggested in terms of actually doing these kind of measurements during night time. And then during the night time, whatever flows are occurring in the network, they turn out to be, you can actually look at it as losses. Okay, that's the standard procedure that most manuals prescribe. Anything above and beyond that is unauthorized withdrawals. So you can actually even quantify the losses in terms of unauthorized withdrawals as well as leaking joints and so on, and then try to fix it. So this also tells you where the leakages are occurring. So you can actually do a patching. Either try to go to the network, do a patch of work and improve it, or relay the pipeline and so on. So that's the second problem that we have actually dealt with. Again, this uses a systematic analysis strategy, but which uses what we call reconciliation, data reconciliation. Again, the basic principle behind all of this is the data are not independent of each other. They have to satisfy certain fundamental physical relationship, and that's the one we are exploiting in order to find the inconsistencies. Wherever there are inconsistencies, we know it is due to some unauthorized withdrawal and so on. Okay. The third problem that we worked on, this is very specifically related to water distribution. And in India, most networks in India are operated intermittently. There's not a pressurized system. We have a bunch of valve operators who go and open and close valves and selectively decide which part of the network should be served. So the reason for this is because over a period of time, these networks are built to last about 30 to 50 years today. And they are buried pipelines and hardly, not necessarily well maintained, hardly any metering. None of these networks are actually being metered. And over a period of time, they keep adding new pipes and so on to serve new population growth. And because of this, after some time, the network is unable to serve all the people simultaneously. You may not have the quantity of water, which is a big problem in Chennai. But even if you have water, the pumps are not designed to push water and supply everybody. So the only way you can service the entire community is by actually selectively deciding which part of the network can be served. And another aspect of this thing, and because of this, these networks are operated what we call intermittently. That's true of even IIT Madras. We get water once in 2 days. And the way we resolve the problem is to have storage capacities, both in the network as well as in your individual houses. So you basically fill the tank and use the water in the tank for 2 days before the next time it's filled. It turns out the energy you actually consume in order to fill these reservoirs, the intermediate reservoirs that you fill, the order in which you actually fill them decides the amount of energy used to do the job. And we have actually found out that if you actually schedule the filling properly, you can cut down the energy utilization for the same service levels, maintain the same service levels with about 10 to 15% lower energy costs. So we decide the order in which you should fill and open and close valves. So instead of actually asking the operator to go and do it, which he will do only once a day, we actually want to automate these valves. These are on-off valves. And then we actually have a schedule which is automatically generated by solving a very nice optimization problem. And then we download the schedule and control these valves so that the energy consumption is low as well as the service levels are met. If there is insufficient water, it will be equitably distributed among the people. So that's the problem that we have solved, and we actually decided that let's take it to the field. So we tried to do this in IIT Madras, and then because we built a small lab facility, complicated water network, and tried to demonstrate this. This got the attention of everybody. Now we have 4 projects running, one for a multi-village scheme in Maharashtra, one for BHEL Trichy, the campus, one to actually automate about 300 tanks that are there in Ramanathapuram district that just got recently funded. So the reason I can show you some of the things that we did in order to enable this, part of this has got to do with IoT devices also. So these distributed systems are not metered. So first of all, you have to decide how to actually meter them. And we used, and it has to be low cost because nobody is going to spend a lot of money for metering. So we decided to develop our own, what we call enhanced watt meter, if you want to call it that. We used existing sensors, put in the IoT capability using LoRa technology. So we have now an attachable device to any sensor you buy. You attach this, it makes it wireless. The reason why we use LoRa is because it's open spectrum and doesn't have any cost, no operating cost, easy to maintain and so on. So we have these devices fitted. Now these are ones we are actually using in our network to transmit the data. So the kind of data that we actually use is the levels in various reservoirs we actually transmit. We also have automated all the existing valves using motors, and we made the LoRa device to actually communicate bidirectionally, which means I can actually control it remotely by sending a signal to the LoRa device. I can open and close these. So we have done this. We have done this demonstration in IIT, and so we are now taking it to the field. And it turns out now you can actually sitting in your lab, like you would do in a plant, chemical plant. This is the interface that we have developed using AT&T open source software, Grafana, which actually tells you the levels in the various tanks in your reservoir system. And also, the valve status I have not shown. You can also see the valve status and decide which one to operate and so on. So it connects up to my earlier problem. We have a schedule that is automatically generated. We can download it. We can actually manually operate it if you want to follow the schedule, or we can completely close the loop and using this. So that's what we have done. And as I said, there are 4 or 5 field projects now going on simultaneously to demonstrate the use of this technology. While this is true, I just want to conclude, the field problems are quite different from what we started off with. we find the simplest thing of even what you call maintaining the pump. Most places you will find the pump is burning out very often. The pipe is bursting without any reason. And whenever you ask the operators, they say, oh, power is going off unexpectedly. So it turns out that not even the simplest of what we call the trip mechanisms that we put in to save the pump. Right? So most of our effort now has initially gone into fixing that problem. We have a panel there which actually ensures that valves are not, pumps are not turned on when the valves are closed. That way the pipe will get burst. Similarly, when a power goes down, we actually gradually, there's a graceful way in which we shut down the pump. So all of these features were first put in. They are simple, these are existing techniques, but only thing the people who implement it have not done all of this. So we have done this first before actually doing the automation. So that's where we are. It is close.
Fascinating. I didn't know so much about the water network. We just take it granted. We just take it for granted.
Yeah, so one of the lessons that we have learned is first get the data before you talk anything else. And that turns out to be the bigger problem, just getting data. And no data, there's no IoT, no AI, no fun.
So that's why we have actually came up with our own IoT devices in order to equip them with sensors. Not only equip them with sensors, but also transmit it remotely to a place there from which we can monitor and control the network.
Thank you, Dr. Shankar. I'm going to introduce Dr. Raghu much better this time. A little bit short, not a long one.
That's 30 minutes.
Please go ahead. So, what I've learned about Dr. Raghu is he graduated in 90 from Madras, and besides being a professor, he's also a co-founder and director of a company called Gyan Data. Great. Fantastic.
Yeah, so I'm going to talk about some applications in energy also. While we talk about data science, I'm also going to talk a little bit about first principles modeling and things that we have done. And I'm also going to tell you that all of us, when we came to the US, probably we never thought about going back to India for academics and so on. But I just want to tell you that doing academics in India is about real fun now, because we get to solve all kinds of problems. And being in IITs, there's a special advantage because there are only 5 IITs with maybe 40 faculty, very active on many things. So you get to solve lots of problems. And I'm going to show you one real interesting problem that we solved, a real life problem for the Indian defense. So the idea is the following here. So when you have a fuel cell, you have stacks which give you power, but you cannot have a single stack which gives you all the power, right? So you have multiple stacks that you have to operate. And the Indian Navy is building a submarine, and the backup power is going to be done by a 270 kilowatt phosphoric acid fuel cell with multiple modules. And the question is, how do you draw power from each of these stacks, right? So if all of them perform the same, then the obvious answer is that I'll draw the same amount of power from each of these stacks. But because each of them go through different degradation mechanisms, the performance is not the same for all of these stacks. So the question is, when all of these stacks perform differently, how would you draw power so that you use the minimum react time possible? Why do you want to do that? Basically, the idea here is if a submarine goes down, what they call as a SRT, how long it stays underground depends on how efficiently you utilize your fuel. So if you're able to efficiently utilize your fuel, then you could stay for longer. So the idea was to increase the amount of time you stay under for more than 30%. So that's a problem that we started to look at. And of course, you cannot have fancy computers, workstations, all that, because this is a very space constrained problem. So you have a hull, you have a very small space in the hull where everything has to fit. So ultimately, whatever algorithm that you come up with has to go onto what's fancily called as edge analytics. It has to go to a device, and how do you do it is the problem that we solve. So this is what is called this resource allocation problem. And if you do this right, you will minimize the use of fuel, and then you will be able to run the SRT for much longer. Now, I've been giving these kinds of talks. Now, anytime you say you are an MLA guy now in India, you get called for all kinds of talks. Probably last 2 months I've given about 20 talks. I'm not even joking. And all of these talks we are told never to use equation. Right? So being a faculty, I got totally sick and tired of this, and I said, I'm going to throw caution to the wind, and I'm going to show equations here. And my logic is, if I cannot show equations to a room full of IITs, where else can I do? So what we did is we posed this as an optimization problem. It's called a nonlinear optimization problem. So if you look at the curve on the left-hand side, depending on where you operate on the x-axis, the amount of losses are different, right? So if you have different stacks, these losses are different. So you have to figure out a way of solving this problem where you minimize the losses, right? Can you guess what the answer is? You don't need math for this. Just common sense. Wherever you match the marginal utility of all of these stacks, that's where the best performance is. So for a delta increase in current, wherever I get the same delta increase in power, that's the marginal utility we talk about. We match all of these stacks so that the marginal utilities are the same. Well, we figured this out in a very circuitous route. First, what we did was we put this into an optimizer and solve this. And sometimes the optimizer will solve it, sometimes it will say not converge, but it will take at least 4 or 5 minutes to do this. And you need computing power. So we said, we are not going to do this. What we wanted to do was what the optimizer was solving in 5 minutes, we wanted to solve it in about milliseconds, right? So that's what we wanted to do. So the other point that I'm trying to make is a lot of people talk about data science and giving solutions and so on. There's a lot of work that you need to do before you get a solution that fits the problem. So what we did was we went about a very roundabout route of doing this. We did something called Kalush-Kunteker conditions and figured out that this marginal utility is a solution. And ultimately what we did was we pushed most of the computations offline. And the online computation, we showed that it's just a simple solving an equation and it gives you the solution. And ultimately what we did was we put this on a device, something like an ARPI, and then we have this working for the Indian Navy in their system. So that's one thing. So this is what I talked about in terms of really getting real fun projects to work on. And this is in the field, and we're getting data in terms of how this works, and so on. Okay, so this is one problem, and of course, more equations. Where does AI come from? So when you talk about computing the marginal utility, you have to be able to model the power as a function of current, and that's a model. So that model we build based on data, and then we have ways of updating the model all the time. So you cannot build a model and then just live with it. So how do you get data to update this model? So this whole solution, including the model updater, the optimization and so on, all have gone into a very, very small device, and it's running on their test bench. Okay, the connection of this to many other problems. Once we solve this problem, we just realized that there are a whole host of problems which have the same characteristics, right? So I just talked about power sharing in fuel cells. Well, the same idea is useful for power sharing in battery packs. Not all battery packs are going to be at the same state of charge or state of health, so you can use this. You can use this in reverse osmosis units. If when you're sending current and you have multiple units, you again use whatever is the most efficient, much more effectively, right? And you can keep thinking about this more, and I was talking to someone. Other problem is, think about computer networks, right? So if you have multiple compute machines doing stuff already, and you have some task to be done, what portion of the task do you give to each one of these machines? That is again the same problem, right? So very many problems we believe can be solved using this whole idea of power sharing. Okay, so that's one thing. Only 2 more slides, I will finish quickly. Okay. So the same kinds of things we have taken to other fields. So we have an energy lab where we marry both experimental work with data science. We've been working quite a bit on lithium-ion batteries. So recent work is on modeling lithium-ion batteries. And here the basic idea is not just model the basic reactions, but also model all the side reactions, which lead to what is called as capacity fate. So we have very, very detailed lithium-ion battery models, which will model SEI layer, lithium plating, dendritic formation, and so on. So we have models which are computationally fast. What you can do then is, if you want to charge, and there was a question last time, right? If you charge very fast, you have degradation, right? So you can have very fast charging, but number of cycles you can run will be less. But you can have very simple, slow charging, and you can run it for multiple cycles, right? Why does this happen? Because based on your charging mechanism, the capacity fade reactions are different, right? So can you come up with charging, discharging protocols where the objective is to minimize capacity fade, at the same time get as fast a charge as possible. So we have been working on problems like this for several years in chemical engineering using a model predictive control framework. So we translated that to this problem, and we have been able to show that we can actually come up with charge discharge profiles which will minimize capacity fade. And the last problem I'm going to talk about is, again, lithium-ion batteries a lot of people talk about, and I'm not going to mention the company here because I see I'm being recorded. There's a company in India which has lots of these lithium-ion batteries, and they were promised that these will run for 10 years without any problem and so on. They already find that 40% of the batteries are dead in 4 years. So they really want to find out why this is not happening, and is there some way of doing predictions in terms of the state of health of these batteries and state of charge of these batteries. We have tons of data now from multiple sites. So here we are really trying to use data science to see whether we can give advisories in terms of state of health, state of charge, and so on. So these are kinds of problems that we look at also. So this is my last slide, and this is a tubular PEM fuel stack that we have developed. It's a very, very lightweight. Most of the stack is actually plastic. We 3D print this stack and then do some coating. So we are trying to build a stack like this, about 300 watts for UAV applications. We have started based on a stack like this. So I just wanted to give you a picture of our second prototype stack that we have built, tubular PEM fuels, a low temperature fuel cell stack. Okay, so with that I'll stop and I'll be happy to answer questions now or later.
Any one question?
Hey, thanks, Malik. So you talked about using this data to check the health of cells. So is it possible to use the data to be able to predict the life and the yield of the cells as they are being made?
Yeah, so you can. So in all of this data science first principles business, if you have tons and tons of data, you've seen all of this, you can do it purely database. But I believe in many of these problems, because these capacity fade mechanisms, right? They at different reaction temperature ranges, these mechanisms are very different. So what you could potentially do is, as and when the data is coming in, you keep generalizing your model, get your parameters right. So use the model to predict the life. I would not still depend on purely a database model to predict life or state of charge or state of health even. So rather, what I would do is I would really come up with a computationally tractable first principles model, which the parameters are being tuned by the data, so that I can use that model to predict. Would be my answer.
Thank you, Dr. Fu. I would next introduce Dr. Tenzin Hong from Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, and he's been working on commercial buildings energy consumption, and he comes from China, from Tsinghua University.
I'm very happy here today. Always, heard of IOT, Western University in India, and so I went to the Western University in China. So I'm very excited about some of the problems. So I'm going to share with you just, like an introduction, some of the work we've been working on. I think relates to energy, but we are looking at not one building, the entire building stock in city. So it's a very different scale. So I think if you look at the city scale, there's a lot of challenges. I think we already mentioned some of that. Like buildings becomes much more dynamic. Used to take electricity from the grid, but now you store it, your on-site generation. Actually, you can produce electricity back to the grid. And depends on the time you use energy. Sometimes the grid may ask the building to use more energy than necessary, because a lot of PV or wind turbine. So can we change the building or control operation to do that? it becomes a very critical question we try to address. So, and then I think the other challenge, if we talk about at the city scale, cities use a lot of energy in terms of for building, industry, and transportation. So buildings, I think in the US, overall consume about 40%. But if you look at San Francisco, it's 52%. New York City is 70%. So a lot of action, I think we have to look at the buildings. And there's more and more cities are signing up for these, we call 80 by 50, or Sierra Clubs and Ready for 100, basically all going to 100% clean energy by 2040 or 2045 or 2050. So I think some of the questions we've been working with cities trying to help them is, well, how can they actually get there? Because you can do a lot of different things, different paths with different implications of investment, societal, costs, and how that will get changed by the climate. The global climate is changing. So all those things, it's sort of our goal of our research, try to inform cities, with those kind of policy. And I think the good thing is, cities, urban systems is complicated, right? You're talking about human, you're talking about building, transportation, urban climate, all the power supply, right? So I think on the other side, right, with the modern technology, a lot of sensors, IOT, so you get huge amount of data now, right? We also get much, much more computing. And then, of course, everybody talking about artificial intelligence and machine learning. So how these three things together, right, can provide new method and thinking for us to solve cities' energy and environmental problems. So this just illustrates an exascale computing project. It's funded by Department of Energy's Office of Science. So we try to figure out at a city scale how the buildings, urban climate, transportation, and how people make decisions that influence the energy use and environment. And if you look at a connection, for example, buildings consume energy, right? And the energy, of course, is influenced by the local urban environment, temperature, humidity. But building also emits heat, right? That would change your local urban environment. And again, transportation moves people from home to office, right? It emits heat, it consumes energy. It also emits pollutants. So all these things are connected. So how we solve this kind of interdependency? Through traditional physics model, or through now we have much more data running those empirical or machine learning approach. So this just to illustrate, I think there's some effort like IOT. This is IoT, it's called Array of Things. But the idea is through that you can monitor or sense the city. It depends on what kind of parameter you're interested. It can be temperature, humidity, it can be gunshot, like for Chicago. It can be humidity, it can be traffic noises. You can basically monitor a lot of things. And how then you feed these through machine learning algorithm to tell us the patterns, temperature, the pollution, traffic, and stuff like that. We're also using some of the techniques to look at the Google Street View image and try to get information like what is the type of this building? Is this a commercial or residential? What is the window wall ratio? What's the construction? Is it wood frame? Is it a brick or measurement? So this information at one building level is very easy to get. Imagine there's 1 million buildings in New York City. There's no easy way to get all the information for every building. So we have to use some of the techniques like this. So we have been, for the last couple of years, building a platform called City BEX. Basically, we have the data for every building in the city, and some buildings have only very high-level information, building type, floor area, when the building was built, and how many stories. Some buildings have very detailed information about what system, what construction, window wall ratio, energy use. So they have very diverse. But the idea is with this kind of platform, we can model every building, and then can answer questions like earlier mentioned. If a city wants to reduce energy use of their buildings by half, what can they do? What kind of technology is more cost effective to retrofit this building to reduce energy use? So this is more illustrate how we construct the data to represent the city's building stock. We have 1 million buildings, a lot of information. So you start with city's public record, right? There's a building footprint, land use data, tax assessors records. Some buildings are also subject to city's local law, like they have to disclose their annual energy use, right? So with that information, we do all the mapping, create like one record for each building. And I mentioned some buildings only have 4 data points. Some buildings can have up to 200 data points. right? So then we massage it, we standardize the term we use to describe this information, and then create a unique ID for every building. Because like in people in the US, we have a social security number. Everybody's different. But for buildings in a park, we don't have anything that's unique to represent them. And it creates lots of challenge how we make different data sets to create these central data to represent the building. So at the end, then we simplify the data and then produce it in different formats that can serve different applications to solve all different type of urban applications. So, for example, you can visualize the building performance at a city scale. And particularly, this is a data set for San Francisco. They have a local law requires buildings larger than 25,000 square feet have to disclose their energy use, every year. And so it shows what are the buildings comply with the law, what are the buildings violate the law, and you may be able to see some, geospatial patterns. Why this group of buildings, right, they have not complied. And that would help cities to target in terms of policy how to improve those buildings to comply with local law. You use it to evaluate city scale, like solar PV. Assume like I'm going to install PV on every roof in the city, right? So how much would that generate in terms of kilowatt hours, right? What is the cost, right? And those kind of things can be evaluated quickly. And then you can use the tool also to look at earlier mentioned, how can I retrofit the buildings, right? So I think this is San Francisco, it's a microclimate, basically shows you, those are the 5, effective technologies. You replace the lighting with LED, you use the smart, plug controller, basically turn off the devices if it's not going to be used, right? And the daylight sensor, occupancy sensor, nobody in the space, turn the services off. So those are very common sense things. And with that all together, if you retrofit is about 9,000 buildings in the northeast region of San Francisco, I think that you can reduce energy use, right, overall from 30% to 50%. Every building is a little bit different, but overall, right, you can achieve like 30 to 50% of energy savings. And those costs, payback I think is less than 5 years. So those kind of analysis I think can inform cities or those kind of policies. So this one just visualized San Francisco's urban climate. And I think about 2 years ago, 2017, there's a heat wave hit San Francisco. Temperatures are up to 106 degrees Fahrenheit, and that broke the record for 140 years. So we try to identify where is the region in the city that have a higher risk of people's lives, because most of the residential buildings in San Francisco don't have air conditioning. And that would help city to target this maybe the area or the neighborhood that would need more help if there's another heat wave coming. So I think that gets more frequent now. And so I think with that I just illustrate some of the research we have been doing.
I think we have a few questions.
Fascinating. Actually, there's a new legislation in California which is going to upzone a lot of areas within cities based on transit and other criteria. So my question is that, is this something which is a public information that can be utilized at this point? I mean, is this open source data? And is this something which, because we have a group in my city which is actually trying to figure out what will be the impact of upzoning certain transit paths and all that on the microclimate kind of stuff.
Yeah, good question. So the platform itself is free for people, everybody can use, but the data was sort of consolidated, collated from all the public data sources. So we have not made the data open source, but the platform itself is free and open for people to use. And we've been working with some internationals. Basically, we already developed a version for Chile. We are going to develop a version for Italy, working on a version for Canada. We'll be happy to work with some of you who have a version for India.
Thank you very much. We have Madhav is a technology deployment engineer at Chevron, and he's a graduate from Texas A&M. So welcome, Madhav.
Thank you. Sorry. So my talk is on digital transformation for the traditional energy industry and also how this could be translated to newer energy as well in the future. But my expertise has been in the oil and gas industry, and I've been involved with mostly with deep water production operations for about a decade, and now I'm with Chevron here at the Technology Center in Richmond. So the energy industry has traditionally been digitized at the scale of process control and some level of process monitoring and so on, but it's still a heavy industry with, it's not as sort of computationally advanced as some others, although there's been a great need. So we're now in this generation where we've heard the term IoT and so on. We're at this intersection of huge computational power, cheap computational power and sensors and so on. And the challenge is how can we transform an industry that really was developed in the 60s and 70s and sometimes still relies on traditional digital technologies. So the motivation for digitalization, we have a constant need to maintain profitability, of course, but we're a very safety critical industry, so there's a very important focus on pressure containment, containment of our fluids to prevent incidents, and so these are dual objectives: to maintain the integrity of our devices physically, but of equipment and pipelines, but also to maximize production. So many of our assets, many of you have heard of Permian and shale gas and so on. These are examples of settings where we have unmanned facilities. We've also got we've had in shallow water facilities in the past unmanned platforms and booster stations and so on. So the geographical challenges can be great in this industry. So there's always a need for us to have an early warning kind of system. So with people in the control hubs, let's say in Houston or in other in the refinery control room, have advance notice of problems that could happen, so they can send out technicians and solve them before they happen. And the utility of having a well-connected up energy system, traditional energy system, is extends into the future where we're going to get more renewables into the mix, and we see multiple large energy companies create energy platforms where you could integrate production monitoring of both traditional and non-traditional energy, and that goes into the whole grid mindset. So this is something that I've just already touched upon. We have huge leaps in computing power and lots of cheap sensors. And one of the professors had brought up LoRa, and that's something that we use as well for IoT devices. So the context is that we live in an age where it's imperative that we take advantage of all these technologies at our disposal. So I'm in a program called Smart Facilities at Chevron, but unfortunately for corporate proprietary reasons, I'm not able to share specific use cases. As you might understand, wasn't able to get authorized for some of those for competitive reasons as well. So I just wanted to have a few generic slides, and this is really Industry 4.0. Most of you have heard of this, and this is cyber-physical systems. And as I said, the chemical industry as well as the oil and gas industry is really the technologies that were developed. We really peaked in the 60s and 70s, where we had SCADA systems and distributed control and so on. And right now, it's almost too big to change that infrastructure. So we've almost had to make a jump from the 1970s to 2019. So it's just there's been like 2 or 3 decades of a gap. Now we've sort of we're now in Industry 4.0, and This is something that I studied when I was, when I was doing my master's in chemical engineering. We were, process dynamics is something that is studied by systems theorists in different fields, not just chemical engineering. But controllability and observability are both very important properties of the system. And the future plant, which is autonomous, which is designed to be autonomous, would be highly controllable as well as highly observable. Many times you could retrofit an existing plant with sensors, for example, online monitors for thermal or thickness monitoring and so on, which gives you, what's the state of the system now. But some of these are point measurements, and in large-scale systems like, let's say, deep water, where you have up to 9,000 feet of water depth in the Gulf of Mexico, you can't really go and put in a sensor there very easily. So what we've been trying to do is blending hardware-based sensing with soft sensing. So that's where the computational power comes in, because instead of having complex iterative models of thermal hydraulics, we can have simple analytic solutions that run in in half a second that are web-based and deployable on say a Raspberry Pi or a very simple computing machine. And what this does is it makes up for the gaps in physical sensors, and if you tune them well enough with existing data, then we start relying on this sort of mixed or hybrid set of real-time data and then real-time sort of soft sensors that are tuned to the real-time data, make up for the gaps. This is a book that I like a lot, and this kind of informs the philosophy of this autonomous plant. It's Thinking Fast and Slow by Dan Kahneman. He's an Israeli psychologist who won a Nobel Prize for economics, and he was at Berkeley for several decades. So system one is fast, automatic. It's when you're driving, for example, and you're making all these quick decisions without explicitly defining them. And most of our lives are spent in system one mode. But system two is much slower. So let's say you're walking down the street and I ask you what's 1 plus 2, and you can just say 3 while walking down. But if I ask you what is 121 times 673, I know you can do it, but you'll have to stop for a second, think, and then that's when your system 2 is engaging. So as an analog to this, system 1 is really the edge networks, where we can do simple calculations like rate of change, how long have you spent in this regime, how many and things like that. System 2 would be much higher computational power needed. Sometimes you'll have to send data back to the hub in oil and gas. So I would say send it back to Houston, and they do some deeper number crunching and give us this data. So it's really important to figure out what kind of problems you want real-time solutions to, and what kind of problems you want to send back and have crunched in the system 2 level. So once you do that, you realize that there's a very simple sort of architecture. At the base, you connect, collecting all your data from sensors, and these go into asset management systems. And like I said, some of these sensors are soft sensors, so we don't actually have, pressure transmitter or flow transmitter every 10 feet or every 100 feet, but you have a dynamic process model that's updating based on the few sensors that you have. The next layer is called integration and analytics. So we have multiple solutions in our industry, like Asset Framework and multiple startups. For example, Seek is the go-to choice for the oil and gas industry. It just works from your web browser, pulls in real-time data, and helps you to slice data, cleanse data, exclude different data sets, and synthesize data into dashboards. And this is just all the system 1 kind of stuff, quick. The top layer is just the visualization, which also is part of some of these packages. And as I said before, it's really important to figure out what metrics you want real time, and other metrics, let's say corrosion monitoring. The phenomena only happen over time scales of months to years, and those are things that you can do on a different kind of schedule. So this is the sort of integrated plant for downstream where you have your supplies coming in, connected to demand planning, and just based on the external ecosystem or marketplace. You have your manufacturing production. They're all vertically integrated because it just depends on your value chain, where the best routing and optimization opportunities are. And it's especially true for the LNG world, where the spot prices are really defining sort of your arbitrage opportunities. This is the operations center, which is the hub, as I've been describing it, and that's where a lot of the big crunching happens. And then, finally, you've got on the edges here different offerings from Silicon Valley that would help enable this, very traditional industry to get to 4.0. And this is just an example of a company that's based here in Silicon Valley. Tom Siegel started it, C3.ai. It's a leader in sort of pipelines and it's monitoring energy systems. And this is from public domain, so I'm able to talk to it. And you see how they've got this is their architecture. So they have predictive maintenance. They've got multiple AI offerings as well, based on data. So this basically shows that the challenges of manufacturing industry are being looked at in Silicon Valley with all the latest technologies and so on. But I've got to admit that as somebody in the data transformation world, the biggest challenge is getting good quality data. There's a lot of noise, there's a lot of need for calibration. These physical systems, so for example, if I want to look at oxygen level in water real time, over 90% of the time there's going to be calibration issues, so it's a large data set, but not very useful. And many times meters could be down, if we have organic matter from petroleum, like the asphaltenes, they could end up messing up the functionality of downhole pressure monitoring. So again, we're going to rely on soft models rather than this actual sensor. So once we solve data quality, then the next big problem is reconciling structured data and unstructured data from different sources, connecting them all up together, and the last thing is the most important, creating this culture where not just people in the office, but field operators as well are on this data transformation train, and they're all on board onto a common goal of monitoring the facility. So with that, come to the end of my presentation. So if anyone has a question, for the one question on this.
Any question?
You mentioned soft model a few times.
Yes.
I'm a strong disbeliever of soft model if you don't have the physics, how do you have the soft model?
Oh no, these are definitely based out of physics. So there's different levels of physics that you can use, right? So,
right.
For example, in the oil and gas industry, we have, you can solve large-scale DAE systems, differential algebraic systems, and mesh them together and come up with a solution. Or you could just do a very simplified version of it and come up with, and blend that with the rules of thumb and historical data and come up with an estimate. So let's say it's
approximations is what you're talking about when you talk about soft model.
No, these are
my
actual
experience is that they end up as approximations because the complexity of what we are trying to model is so high, and the full physical understanding doesn't exist, because if it exists, we would have closed equations which would precisely define them. We lead towards data science because we are unable to do this. And then the data also is giving us a lot of trouble because of exactly the points you said, real world data.
Right.
So we are kind of caught between a rock and a hard place.
So what I've noticed is that the models themselves may not be complete, right? So they give you a first estimate, and a lot of times people want to spend a lot of computational power doing CFD, for example, or finite element, and discretize the grid and try to solve it every half second or something like that. But once you relax some of those criteria and solve it at a different length and time scale, you get approximate solutions and that could, that itself is sufficient. If you really don't, in the past, operators would just say, look at the pressure at the bottom of the seafloor, look at the pressure at the top of the platform, take the arithmetic mean, and that's the pressure at the middle of the riser. That's it, right? But as we do more and more modeling and so on, that is actually a pretty decent approximation. So you have to use heuristics, and you have to use simplified models, compromise a little bit on the discretization, and that becomes a first pass, which is better than nothing.
Thank you, Madhav. So I think we're coming up for an hour, but can we take 10 more minutes to ask questions, because I think people had more questions. I'll start with a very simple question for our Dr. Shankar. The requirements in the life of academia is much harder today. How do you guys balance the teaching and publishing papers and starting companies and actually doing innovation, which matters?
We don't balance it well. So we don't spend enough time at home, actually. But I think one of the things that I have learned is research feeds into teaching. So if you do research, then you can teach better. So I think research and teaching go hand to hand together. But this startup and all of those are totally different things that take up a lot of your time. And Shankar and I, we have been very foolish. Speak for them. So we started something, and it takes a lot of time and effort. And also faculty are not trained in this. That's another thing that I just realized, because I think entrepreneurship also requires that you learn when to give up and when to
join IIT startups.
So I just want to add to it. I mean, I've actually reduced my my number of students I guide. If I actually guide in 5, I guide only 1 or 2. It takes a lot of time. The other things that I have to probably learn, I find people who are trained in the US learn how to actually do a pyramidal way of actually organizing their research structure, which means at the top they have postdoctoral students who actually guide PhD students, who actually guide MTech students. And the faculty member hardly ever meets anybody. I mean, he just meets the top guy. He actually runs it like a manager. I have not used to it. Actually, right from the day one, I had probably 1 or 2 students, and I used to have a hub and spokes model in my research, which I think is not a great idea. I have looked at them, and I think that's possible. I have actually, because of my nature, I have reduced my number of students and devote more time to actually industrial problem solving, because I think ultimately at some point you make the compromise. Initially it is okay. In the earlier years, I was interested in solving puzzles. Actually, you call it mental, you know what, right? I won't mention the word. But afterwards, as time progressed, we have just shifted to application-oriented thing.
Fantastic. We've been given 5 minutes, so please keep your answers to like 30-40 seconds so that we can answer more questions.
Sure. My question is particularly for Shankar Narasimhan. It was an interesting presentation because we are working on automated driving particularly, where we see a scope for looking at it from a network perspective going forward. I mean, especially understanding the intrinsic capacity of the network and kind of characterizing utilization. And a larger part of infrastructure overbuilding kind of happens because of lack of understanding of this is what we see. I mean, especially the theoretical and simulation side of things is also very important. Like, IIT is typically like the theoretical side, they're very strong. But mostly like the simulation side, have you been doing simulations on the understanding this problem well? Like, because we are very interested in this, applying this to automated road networks. Like
yeah. In fact, for the water network, we do hydraulic simulations to understand the behavior in terms of trying to solve. But the problem is if you try to put it in an optimization framework, it's very difficult because you're trying various possibilities. And therein lies the ability to come up with decomposition strategies that will give you a solution in fact, and that's where our skill lies basically. I would say.
If you're interested, I will have a deeper discussion about this because we are looking to kind of collaborate, and I had discussed with the electrical engineering faculty, but I mean, definitely because you're working on something like that.
Thanks, yeah. I'd be happy to see it.
So one last question. So last question, then you can take it offline.
Yeah, my question is, when you do IoT, process takes over.
And I'm wondering whether there's a human dimension which says, wait a minute, I'm losing control here. Is that been an observation anywhere? Or, because I think there is a feeling of lack of control.
No, I don't think so. I think so. We have an IoT device. I was mentioning to someone. We have an IoT device where we have loaded all kinds of pollution monitoring sensors, temperature, humidity, UV, light, and then we have these on vehicles going around the city collecting data. In fact, that's wonderful, right? If you want to identify how these pollution parameters change over time and space in a city, there is no other way I can think of that you can do it. So I would not say that there is any lack of control. If at all anything, I think there is a sense of empowerment, which suddenly you feel like you can collect data that you could not before.
Just one, I think in the water distribution, however, we face this problem because valve operators actually think they are going to lose the job. So what we did was we actually made it easy for them. We said that automation is only making sure that you don't go physically to the device and or you press a button to open the valve, not your put a big handle and start turning. So those things really help to get their buy-in. But if I had fully automated and displaced them, I'm sure they would actually have destroyed it. They would have actually pulled the plug. I'm sure.
There comes a human element in innovation. You can't disrupt the people who are going to
No, but that's not just to do with IoT, right? Automation was the same fear. Now AI is the same fear. But if you talk about people losing jobs, I don't think IoT is any special significance. Right? So, and people have not lost jobs after automation.
No, I think the reference was, and maybe there's a regulatory dimension on top of
That's a different. So all the
US
privacy
FDA coming and inspecting pharmaceutical plants in India, generic houses.
Yeah.
It's like, whoa, wait a minute, I don't have the ability to, the process takes over, and then I'm kind of a recipient. It's not loss of jobs.
But FDA has come in India and then shut down facilities.
Yeah, that's why.
So, but that, again, that's actually, I would argue that's actually poor use of the technology that is leading to these problems rather than the more of it, right? If these facilities had gone to continuous processing and then been on the top of the line, this would be happening to them, right? So.
Thank you very much. Thank you everyone for participating, and thanks to our panelists for the time.
So just a quick update. There is a quick break for tea. We've already gone over by like 20 minutes. So it will be like 5-10 minutes, and then we meet in the other room. Have a cup of tea.